The notification sound from my phone cut through the sterile hospital air like a blade. I almost ignored it. My attention was focused on adjusting the pillow behind my mother's frail shoulders, trying to make her more comfortable as she drifted in and out of morphine-induced sleep. The cancer had taken so much from her already: her vibrant energy, her infectious laugh, the way she used to hum while cooking Sunday dinner for our sprawling family. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. But something made me glance at the screen. A text message from my son Marcus, sent to what looked like a group chat I wasn't part of. The preview showed just enough to make my blood freeze. Mom's finally dying. When do we get the house? My hands trembled as I fumbled to unlock the phone, praying I'd misread it. But there it was, clear as day, sent to a group chat named Estate Planning, that included all three of my children: Marcus, 28, my eldest who worked in real estate, Sophia, 26, a financial advisor, and David, 23, fresh out of college with a business degree. The responses came quickly. Sophia, finally. The property value has gone up 40% since Dad died. We should list it immediately. David, I already called a realtor. Market's hot right now. Could get $850K easy. Marcus, split 3 ways, that's almost $300K each. About time we get something out of this situation. I stared at the screen, reading and rereading their words, hoping somehow I'd misunderstood. But there was no ambiguity in their cold calculation, no grief in their planning, no love in their eagerness. My mother, their grandmother, was still breathing in the bed beside me, and they were already dividing up her legacy like vultures circling roadkill. The woman who had raised me as a single mother after my father's death when I was 12. The woman who had worked 3 jobs to put me through nursing school. The woman who had babysat my children countless times, baked them cookies every Friday, taught them to garden in her backyard, and listened to their problems with infinite patience. The woman whose house had been the heart of every family gathering for 30 years, and they saw her as nothing more than a real estate transaction. I set the phone down carefully, my nurse training kicking in as I checked Mom's vitals on the monitors. Her breathing was shallow but steady. The doctors had said it could be days, maybe a week. Lung cancer, stage 4, diagnosed too late. At 78, she decided against aggressive treatment, choosing comfort over futile hope. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Rachel, she whispered, her eyes fluttering open. Even sedated, she could sense my distress. What's wrong, sweetheart? I forced a smile, smoothing her silver hair back from her forehead. Nothing, Mom. Just tired. How are you feeling? Like I'm floating, she said with a weak smile. The good drugs, you know? Her humor remained intact even now. Where are the kids? I thought they were coming by today. The kids. My heart clenched. They'll be here soon, I lied, knowing full well they were probably out viewing real estate listings instead of visiting their dying grandmother. Mom's house wasn't just valuable real estate, it was a repository of memories. The Victorian cottage she'd inherited from her own mother, where I'd grown up, where my children had spent countless summers. Every room held stories: the kitchen where she'd taught me to make her famous apple pie, the living room where we decorated Christmas trees, the back porch where she'd held me while I cried over my divorce. But to Marcus, Sophia, and David, it was just square footage and market value. I need to step out for a moment, I told Mom, kissing her forehead. I'll be right back. In the hallway, I pulled out my phone and scrolled back through the group chat. More messages had appeared. Marcus, we should also check on her jewelry. That diamond necklace alone is probably worth $15K. Sophia, don't forget the china set. It's antique, right? Could be valuable. David, what about her car? It's only 3 years old. They were inventorying her possessions like auctioneers, reducing a lifetime of memories to dollar signs. I thought about calling them, confronting them, demanding an explanation. But as I stood there in the fluorescent hospital lighting, listening to the distant beeps and murmurs of medical equipment, a different kind of clarity settled over me. I was 54 years old, a registered nurse who had spent 3 decades caring for others. I'd raised 3 children largely on my own after their father left when David was just 8. I'd worked double shifts to pay for their educations, sacrificed my own dreams to ensure they had opportunities. I'd taught them values, morals, the importance of family, and somehow, I'd failed completely. But as I watched doctors and nurses moving purposefully through the corridor, as I thought about the lives being saved and lost within these walls, I realized something else. I still had time to teach them one final lesson. My mother had always been clever with money, despite working modest jobs. She'd invested wisely, saved carefully, and built a substantial nest egg over the decades. As her only child, I was her sole heir, something my children seemed to have forgotten in their eagerness to claim their share. But inheritance isn't just about money and property. It's about values, legacy, the lessons we pass down. My children had clearly missed those lessons somewhere along the way. Perhaps it was time for a different kind of education. I pulled up my contact list and found the number for Thomas Whitmore, my mother's attorney. A man in his 70s who had handled her affairs for decades. He would be the key to what I was beginning to plan. Mr. Whitmore? This is Rachel Sterling, Margaret Coleman's daughter. I need to discuss my mother's will. Of course, Rachel. How is Margaret doing? I glanced back toward her room, where I could see her still form through the window. Not well. The doctors think it's a matter of days now. And I've learned some things about my children that have made me reconsider their inheritance. I see. Would you like to schedule a meeting? Yes, but not at your office. Can you come to the hospital? I have some specific changes I'd like to make, and I want to do it while my mother is still coherent enough to approve them. Certainly. I can be there in an hour. As I hung up, another text appeared in the group chat. Marcus, maybe we should start cleaning out the house this weekend. Get a head start on things. My jaw clenched. They wanted to start disposing of her belongings while she was still alive. I returned to Mom's room, where she was awake and alert, the afternoon sunlight streaming through the window and catching the silver in her hair. You look determined about something, she observed, studying my face with those sharp blue eyes that had always seen right through me. Mom, I need to ask you something important. About your will. She nodded slowly. I figured this conversation would come eventually. What's on your mind? I showed her the phone, letting her read the messages from her grandchildren. I watched her face change as she took in their words, the surprise, the hurt, and finally, a kind of resigned sadness. I see, she said quietly, handing the phone back. Well, that's disappointing, but not entirely surprising. What do you mean? She sighed, adjusting herself in the bed. They've been asking about the house for years, Rachel. Subtle questions about property values, when I might consider downsizing, whether I'd thought about updating my will. I always hoped they were just being practical, planning for the future. But this? She gestured toward the phone. This shows their true hearts. I want to change the will, Mom. I want to teach them a lesson about family, about respect, about what really matters. Her eyes brightened despite her weakness. What did you have in mind? Something that will make them understand the value of what they're so eager to cash in on. Something that will force them to confront who they've become. Mom was quiet for a long moment, then she smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from her in weeks. You know, your children aren't the only ones who can plan for the future, she said. Call Thomas. And Rachel? Make sure they have to work for every penny. As I dialed the attorney's number again, another message popped up on my phone. Sophia. Should we tell Mom that Grandma probably won't make it through the weekend? Might be better to prepare her. The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. They were discussing me like I was another item to be managed, another obstacle to their inheritance, but they had no idea what was coming. Mr. Whitmore arrived as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across Mom's hospital room. By then, she was fully alert and surprisingly energetic, as if the prospect of her final act of maternal correction had given her renewed strength. Margaret, the attorney said warmly, taking her hand. You're looking well, considering. Thomas, always the diplomat, she replied with a laugh. Let's get to business. My granddaughter just texted my daughter about when they'll get the house. Apparently, my death is primarily a real estate opportunity. Mr. Whitmore's eyebrows rose. I see. And you'd like to make some adjustments? Complete revisions, I interjected. I want them to understand what they're really inheriting, and what they're losing. What we planned over the next 2 hours would have made Machiavelli proud. But as I watched my mother's face light up with each detail, I knew we weren't just rewriting a will. We were writing the final chapter of a family story, and the first chapter of whatever came next. The next morning brought a flurry of activity that had nothing to do with my mother's declining health. Marcus arrived at the hospital at precisely 9 a.m., dressed in his expensive suit and carrying a leather portfolio that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. He'd always been obsessed with appearances, even as a child, the kind of kid who cared more about having the right brand of sneakers than whether they actually fit. "How's Grandma doing?" he asked, barely glancing at the monitors before pulling out his phone. "Any change overnight?" I studied his face, searching for genuine concern and finding only the practiced expression of someone going through the motions. "She's stable. Comfortable. Good, good." He was already scrolling through messages. "Listen, Mom, I've been thinking about the practical stuff. You know, arrangements and all that. Have you talked to Grandma about her wishes? For the service, I mean?" It struck me how he could discuss her funeral while she lay 10 feet away, still breathing, still able to hear every word. The casual cruelty was breathtaking. "We haven't discussed it in detail," I said carefully. "Well, we should probably think about costs. I mean, funerals are expensive, and if we're planning to sell the house quickly, we want to make sure we budget appropriately." There it was, the bottom line, always the bottom line. Marcus had inherited his father's talent for reducing everything to a financial calculation. When his marriage had fallen apart 3 years ago, his first concern hadn't been his children's emotional well-being, it had been protecting his assets in the divorce. "The house isn't going anywhere, Marcus." He looked up from his phone, something sharp flickering in his eyes. "What do you mean?" "I mean your grandmother is still alive, and making plans for her death while she can hear you is incredibly callous." His jaw tightened. "I'm being practical, Mom. Someone has to think about these things. You're too emotional to handle the business side." "Too emotional?" As if caring about my dying mother was a character flaw, a weakness that disqualified me from adult decision-making. I'd heard variations of this dismissal my entire life, from my ex-husband, from hospital administrators, from anyone who found my empathy inconvenient. "Marcus," Mom's voice drifted from the bed, weak but clear. "Come here, sweetheart." He pocketed his phone and approached the bed, his expression shifting into what I'd come to recognize as his concerned grandson mask. "Hey, Grandma. How are you feeling?" "Like I'm dying," she said with characteristic bluntness. "But I can still hear perfectly well. Tell me about this house you're so eager to sell." The color drained from his face. "Grandma, I mean, we're just trying to be prepared for my death." "Yes, I gathered that." Her blue eyes, still sharp despite the morphine, fixed on his face. "Remind me, Marcus, how often have you visited me in the past year?" He shifted uncomfortably. "I've been busy with work, you know how it is, 3 times. She interrupted. "Christmas, my birthday, and Easter. Less than your cleaning lady, who comes twice a week and actually seems to enjoy my company." I watched my son struggle to find a response that didn't make him sound completely heartless. It was a losing battle. "I'm sorry, Grandma. I should have visited more." "Yes, you should have. But you didn't, because I wasn't a priority. Now suddenly you're very interested in my affairs. Why do you think that is?" The silence stretched uncomfortably. Outside, I could hear the usual hospital sounds, distant conversations, rolling carts, the soft ping of elevator doors. Normal life continuing while our family drama played out in this sterile room. Sophia arrived before Marcus could formulate an answer, sweeping in with her usual dramatic flair. At 26, she'd perfected the art of making every entrance feel like a performance. Today she wore designer jeans and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my monthly car payment, her auburn hair styled in loose waves that looked effortless but definitely weren't. "Oh good, you're awake, Grandma," she announced, as if consciousness were a personal favor. "I brought you flowers." She produced a small bouquet from the hospital gift shop, the kind of generic arrangement that screamed last-minute obligation. The same energy she'd put into birthday gifts since she was a teenager, expensive enough to avoid criticism, thoughtless enough to reveal her true feelings. "How thoughtful," Mom said dryly. "Rachel, would you put those in some water?" As I busied myself with the flowers, I listened to Sophia launch into a monologue about her latest promotion at the financial firm where she worked. Everything was about her achievements, her success, her bright future. She spoke to my mother the way she might address a networking contact, polite but detached, focused on her own agenda. "That's wonderful, dear," Mom interjected during a brief pause. "Tell me, what's this I hear about real estate plans?" Sophia's perfectly manicured mask slipped for just a moment. "Real estate? Your brother was just explaining how eager you all are to sell my house. I'm curious about your professional opinion on the market." I turned from the flower arrangement to watch Sophia's face cycle through surprise, embarrassment, and calculation. She recovered quickly. She'd always been the fastest thinker of my 3 children. "Well, Grandma, the market is very strong right now. If someone were to sell a property like yours, they'd probably do quite well. But that's just theoretical." "Of course. Of course." Mom's tone was perfectly neutral, which somehow made it more cutting than any accusation. "Theoretical." Marcus cleared his throat. "Grandma, we're just trying to be responsible. Making sure everyone's prepared for the future." "Whose future, exactly?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. I found myself holding my breath, waiting to see how they'd respond. Would either of them show a moment of genuine remorse? A flash of self-awareness about how their behavior appeared? "Everyone's future," Sophia said carefully. "Including yours, obviously." "Obviously." Mom closed her eyes, and for a moment I thought she might be drifting off. Then she spoke again, her voice stronger than it had been all day. "Rachel, would you call David? I'd like to see all 3 of my grandchildren together." "Of course, Mom." I stepped into the hallway to make the call, leaving Marcus and Sophia alone with their grandmother. Through the glass, I could see them exchanging worried glances. "Good. Let them worry," David answered on the second ring. "Hey, Mom. How's Grandma?" At least he had the courtesy to ask about her condition first. "Not good, honey. She wants to see you. Can you come to the hospital?" "Yeah, of course. I'm just finishing up a client meeting, but I can be there in an hour." "Client meeting?" I was surprised. David had graduated from business school 6 months ago but had been struggling to find steady work. "I thought you were still job hunting." "I am, sort of. This is more of a consultation thing. Helping a local company with their social media strategy." I felt a small flutter of pride. At least one of my children was trying to build something meaningful, even if it was just freelance work. "That's great, David. I'm proud of you for hustling." "Thanks, Mom. Hey, is everything okay? You sound stressed." The genuine concern in his voice almost made me cry. "Just the situation, you know? It's hard watching her fade away." "I know. I'll be there soon." When I returned to the room, Marcus and Sophia were huddled together near the window, speaking in low voices. They broke apart when they saw me, but I caught enough to understand they were strategizing, probably trying to figure out how much their grandmother had overheard of their inheritance planning. "David's on his way," I announced. "Good," Mom said. "I want to discuss some family matters while I still can." The next hour was a masterclass in uncomfortable silence punctuated by stilted conversation. Marcus tried several times to steer the discussion toward practical matters, funeral arrangements, legal details, the logistics of handling her affairs. Each time, Mom deflected with questions about their lives, their relationships, their memories of family gatherings. It was clear they had very few meaningful memories to share. David arrived as promised, looking slightly out of breath and considerably more rumpled than his siblings. At 23, he still carried some of the softness of late adolescence, but there was something in his eyes that suggested he was growing up faster than I'd realized. "Hey, Grandma," he said, approaching the bed without hesitation and taking her hand. "You look tired." "I am tired, sweetheart. But I'm glad you're here." The simple exchange highlighted the contrast between David and his siblings. Where Marcus and Sophia had maintained careful distance, treating Mom like a fragile museum piece, David showed genuine affection. He kissed her forehead, adjusted her blanket, and settled into the chair beside her bed as if planning to stay a while. "Tell me about this consulting work," Mom said. "Rachel mentioned you're helping businesses." David's face lit up. "It's just small stuff right now, but I'm really enjoying it. There's this local nonprofit that helps elderly people with technology, teaching them to use computers, stay connected with family online. They needed help reaching more people, so I'm working on their digital presence. That sounds meaningful, Mom said, and I could hear approval in her voice. It is. The pay isn't great, but I love seeing the difference it makes. Yesterday I helped this 70-year-old woman video chat with her granddaughter in California for the first time. She cried when she saw the baby. The story hung in the air, creating an obvious contrast with Marcus and Sophia's mercenary concerns. I watched my older children shift uncomfortably, perhaps beginning to realize how their behavior appeared in comparison. That's beautiful work, David, Mom continued. Much more important than making money, don't you think? Well, Marcus interjected, money does matter, Grandma. David can't pay rent with good feelings. True, Mom agreed. Though I noticed David isn't here asking about my real estate portfolio. The comment landed like a physical blow. Marcus flushed red while Sophia found sudden interest in her manicure. David looked confused, glancing between his siblings and grandmother. What real estate portfolio? He asked. Sophia spoke quickly. Grandma just means the house, obviously. No, Mom said clearly. I mean the rental properties downtown, the vacation cottage in Maine, and the small office building on Elm Street. The real estate portfolio that generates about $15,000 a month in passive income. The silence that followed was profound. I watched my 3 children process this information, Marcus calculating frantically, Sophia's financial advisor brain spinning through the implications, and David simply looking stunned. I had no idea, David said finally. Most people don't. Mom replied. I've never been one to broadcast my business affairs. Though apparently some people have been speculating quite creatively about my assets. She was enjoying this, I realized. Despite her weakness, despite the pain medication, despite being literally on her deathbed, my mother was savoring the chance to expose my children's greed and force them to confront their own behavior. Grandma, Marcus began, his voice strained. We never meant to be disrespectful, didn't you? She studied his face intently. When you texted about when you'd get the house, what exactly did you mean by that? The question was devastating in its simplicity. There was no way to spin those words into anything resembling respect or appropriate concern. I think there might have been a misunderstanding, Sophia tried. Show me, Mom said quietly. What? Show me the text messages. All of them. The demand hung in the air like a sword. I found myself holding my breath, wondering if either of them would have the courage to be honest. Marcus and Sophia exchanged glances, and I could practically see them weighing their options. Confess and face immediate consequences, or lie. And hope she couldn't verify the truth. David was looking increasingly confused. What text messages? David, I said gently, your brother and sister have been discussing the family inheritance in a group chat. They seem to think your grandmother's death will be financially beneficial for them. What? David's voice rose in genuine shock. While she's still alive? The horror in his voice was exactly what had been missing from his siblings' responses. Here was the human reaction, the appropriate emotional response to the situation. Show him, Mom said to Marcus and Sophia. Show your little brother what family loyalty looks like. Another long silence. Marcus was staring at his phone as if it had personally betrayed him. Sophia was examining her perfectly manicured nails with intense concentration. We were just trying to be practical, Marcus said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Practical. Mom repeated the word like she was tasting something bitter. Is that what we're calling greed now? The machines monitoring her vital signs continued their steady beeping, a mechanical heartbeat counting down her remaining time. Soon enough, these conversations would be over. Soon enough, my children would learn the real consequences of their choices, but for now, in this moment, the lesson was just beginning. David was staring at his siblings with something approaching disgust. You were planning her funeral while she's still breathing? It's not like that, Sophia protested weakly. Then what's it like? David demanded. Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you're treating Grandma like a business opportunity. The family I'd worked so hard to build was fracturing in real time, and the fault lines were exactly where I'd expected them to be. Marcus and Sophia, shaped by their father's materialistic values, incapable of seeing past the dollar signs. David, younger and somehow more innocent, still shocked by the casual cruelty of his older siblings. Rachel, Mom said quietly, would you ask the nurse to increase my pain medication? I think I need to rest. As I moved toward the call button, she caught my hand. Her grip was weak but insistent. And call Thomas, she whispered, just loud enough for my children to hear. Tell him we'll need those documents ready by tomorrow. I nodded, watching my older children's faces pale as they processed the implications. Documents. Legal documents. Changes to legal documents. The lesson was accelerating, and they were finally beginning to understand that their grandmother wasn't just a passive recipient of their neglect, she was an active participant in determining their futures. Thomas Whitmore arrived at the hospital the following afternoon with a briefcase that looked like it had survived several decades of family crises. At 73, he moved with the careful precision of someone who understood that small details could have enormous consequences. I'd known him peripherally for years, he'd handled my parents' affairs since before I was born, but I'd never seen him work before. Watching him transform my mother's hospital room into a temporary law office was like witnessing a master craftsman at work. Margaret, he said warmly, setting up a portable table and arranging documents with methodical care. You're looking remarkably alert for someone planning to rewrite history. Spite is an excellent motivator, Mom replied, her voice stronger than it had been in days. Though I prefer to think of it as creative parenting. I had sent Marcus, Sophia, and David home the previous evening with instructions to think carefully about family priorities. The euphemism hadn't fooled anyone, they knew something significant was brewing. Marcus had called me 3 times since then, each conversation a masterclass in thinly veiled panic disguised as concern. Before we begin, Thomas said, pulling out a voice recorder, I want to ensure everyone understands the gravity of what we're doing. This isn't just about money or property, it's about legacy, values, and the kind of family story you want to leave behind. Mom nodded slowly. I've spent the last 24 hours thinking about my grandchildren. Really thinking, not just assuming. And I've come to some uncomfortable conclusions. Such as? Marcus has turned into his father, everything is a transaction. Everyone is a potential asset or liability. He's 38 years old and has never once asked about my well-being without following up with a question about my finances. Thomas made notes on a legal pad, his expression carefully neutral. And Sophia? Sophia has perfected the art of performative care. She brings flowers and speaks in soothing tones, but she calculates the cost of every gesture. She's a financial advisor who's never offered to help me understand my own investments, because she assumed I was too simple to have any worth managing. I felt a stab of recognition. Both assessments were brutally accurate, and hearing them articulated so clearly made me realize how long I'd been making excuses for my children's behavior. And David? Mom's expression softened. David is different. Not perfect, he's 23 and still figuring things out, but different. He's the only one who visits without wanting something, who asks about my stories instead of my assets. So, you want to adjust their inheritances accordingly? I want to teach them about consequences, Mom corrected. About the difference between earning something and simply expecting it. Thomas spread several documents across the portable table. I've drafted multiple scenarios based on our conversation yesterday. Option 1 maintains the traditional equal distribution but adds performance requirements. Option 2 creates a trust structure with specific conditions. Option 3. He paused, glancing between Mom and me. Option 3 is more creative. Creative? How? I asked. Your mother doesn't just want to change her will, she wants to stage a reckoning. The phrase sent a chill down my spine. What kind of reckoning? Mom's eyes glittered with something that might have been mischief if the circumstances weren't so serious. The kind that forces people to confront who they really are. Thomas pulled out a thick folder. Margaret owns significantly more assets than your children realize. The house they're so eager to claim represents about 15% of her total estate. I stared at him. 15%? The rental properties, investment accounts, and business interests total approximately $2.8 million. The house is worth maybe $400,000 in today's market. The numbers hit me like a physical blow. My mother, who had lived modestly her entire life, who clipped coupons and shopped sales, who still drove the same car she'd owned for 8 years, was effectively a millionaire. How? I managed. Your father was better with money than anyone knew, Mom said quietly. After he died, I invested his life insurance payout and kept adding to it. Every extra dollar, every tax refund, every birthday check from relatives, it all went into the portfolio. Compound interest is remarkable when you have 40 years to work with. Why didn't you ever tell me? Because I wanted to see what kind of people my family would become without the corrupting influence of expected wealth. I wanted my grandchildren to develop their own character, their own work ethic, their own values. The irony was devastating. She'd hidden her wealth to protect her grandchildren's moral development, and they'd still managed to become the kind of people who measured her worth primarily in dollars. The current will divides everything equally among the 3 grandchildren, Thomas continued. But given recent revelations, Margaret wants to implement what we're calling the character protocol, which involves. Thomas turned to a fresh page in his notes. Each grandchild will inherit based on their demonstrated values and behavior over the next 6 months. 6 months? I looked at Mom in alarm. The doctors said days or weeks for the end, Mom interrupted. But wills can be changed right up until someone dies. And I have a feeling I'm going to be around long enough to see how this plays out. There was something in her tone that suggested she wasn't just hoping for extended time, she was planning for it. As if the prospect of orchestrating this final lesson had given her a new reason to fight. Here's how it works, Thomas explained, pulling out a detailed chart. Each grandchild starts with equal potential inheritance, roughly $900,000 each. But that amount will fluctuate based on their actions over the coming months. What kind of actions? Visits to their grandmother that aren't motivated by financial discussions. Genuine care and attention to her well-being. Contributions to family harmony. Evidence of moral character in their daily lives. Mom smiled. And deductions for behavior that demonstrates greed, selfishness, or disrespect. How will you track all this? Thomas tapped his pen against the legal pad. Your mother has retained a private investigative firm. I blinked. A private investigative firm? Barrett and Associates. Very discreet, very thorough. They'll be monitoring your children's behavior, conversations, and activities. Every family visit will be recorded, audio and video. Every social media post will be screen capped. Every conversation with friends, colleagues, or family members will be documented. The scope of it was breathtaking. Mom, that's incredibly invasive. So is discussing my death like a business opportunity while I'm still breathing, she replied. If they want to inherit my life's work, they need to prove they're worthy of it. Thomas pulled out another document. There's more. Each grandchild will face specific challenges designed to test their character. Opportunities to demonstrate genuine care versus performative concern. What kind of challenges? Marcus will receive information suggesting his grandmother is considering donating significant money to charity. We'll see if he tries to manipulate her out of it. Sophia will be presented with investment opportunities involving her grandmother's money, we'll discover whether she prioritizes family welfare or personal gain. David will be given chances to choose between his own financial benefit and his grandmother's well-being. I felt like I was listening to the plot of an elaborate psychological experiment. This is incredibly complex. Complex situations require complex solutions, Mom said. Rachel, these are my grandchildren, but they're also your children. How do you feel about holding them accountable for their behavior? It was a fair question, and one I'd been avoiding. As a mother, every instinct told me to protect my children, to make excuses for their shortcomings, to believe they were better than their worst moments. But as someone who had spent decades watching them develop into adults, I couldn't deny what I was seeing. I think, I said carefully, they need to face the consequences of their choices. Thomas nodded approvingly. There's one more element to consider. The will includes provisions for what happens if any of them contest the changes. Which is automatic disinheritance. Complete and irreversible. The finality of it was stunning. Mom wasn't just changing the rules, she was making it impossible for my children to fight back without losing everything. When do we implement this? I asked. The new will goes into effect immediately, Thomas said. But the grandchildren won't. Be informed about the changes until. He looked at Mom questioningly. Until I decide they're ready to learn, she finished. Which might be tomorrow, or next week, or next month. Depending on how they behave. A knock at the door interrupted our planning session. Sophia's voice came through clearly. Grandma? Mom? Can I come in? The three of us exchanged glances. Thomas quickly gathered his documents while Mom adjusted her position in the bed, transforming from strategic mastermind back into frail grandmother. Come in, sweetheart, she called. Sophia entered carrying an elaborate floral arrangement that must have cost several $100s. The flowers were beautiful, exotic orchids and rare lilies arranged with professional artistry, but they felt like a calculated gesture rather than a heartfelt gift. These are gorgeous, Sophia, I said, accepting the arrangement. I thought Grandma deserved something special. Sophia's voice carried just the right note of loving granddaughter concern. How are you feeling today, Grandma? Better, actually, Mom replied. Strong enough to take care of some important business. Sophia's eyes flickered toward Thomas, who was quietly packing his briefcase. Business? Legal matters, Mom said vaguely. Making sure everything is properly arranged. Oh. Sophia's voice was carefully neutral, but I could see the calculations running behind her eyes. Anything I can help with? I mean, financial planning is my profession. The offer was perfectly reasonable on the surface, but there was an undertone of eager curiosity that made it feel predatory. That's sweet of you to offer, Mom said. But Thomas has been handling my affairs for 40 years. We have our systems. Of course. I just meant if you ever wanted a second opinion on investments or asset allocation. There it was, the real reason for the visit, the expensive flowers, the concerned granddaughter performance. Sophia was fishing for information about the extent of Mom's wealth. My assets are quite simple, Mom said with perfect innocence. The house, my savings account, a few small investments. Nothing that requires sophisticated financial management. I watched Sophia process this information, seeing the disappointment flicker across her face before she covered it with understanding sympathy. Well, of course. I didn't mean to suggest. I just want to make sure you're taken care of. I'm very well taken care of, Mom assured her. Rachel has been wonderful, and Thomas handles everything else. Thomas cleared his throat politely. I should be going, Margaret. Let me know if you need anything else. Thank you, Thomas. For everything. As the attorney left, Sophia settled into the chair beside Mom's bed with the air of someone planning to stay for an extended visit. But instead of asking about Mom's comfort or sharing family memories, she immediately launched into a monologue about market conditions and investment strategies. The really exciting opportunities right now are in emerging markets, she was saying. But you have to be willing to take some risk, and obviously at your age, risk tolerance becomes a major factor. I watched my mother's face as Sophia continued her impromptu financial seminar. Mom nodded politely, made appropriate sounds of interest, and occasionally asked questions that revealed she understood far more about investing than she was letting on. Of course, Sophia concluded, these are just general observations. Without knowing someone's specific financial situation, it's impossible to make concrete recommendations. The fishing expedition couldn't have been more obvious if she'd brought actual bait. That's very thoughtful, Mom said. Though I'm afraid my situation is quite boring from a professional standpoint. Sophia's disappointment was almost tangible. She'd clearly hoped to uncover evidence of hidden wealth, perhaps position herself as indispensable financial advisor to a richer grandmother than she'd realized. Instead, she was faced with the same modest elderly woman she'd always known, or thought she'd known. Well, Sophia said, checking her expensive watch, I should probably get going. Big client meeting this afternoon. Of course, dear. Thank you for the beautiful flowers. After Sophia left, Mom was quiet for several minutes, staring at the elaborate floral arrangement with an unreadable expression. Gilt flowers, she said finally. What? That's what I call arrangements like that. Expensive enough to demonstrate financial capability, elaborate enough to suggest deep caring, but ultimately just a way to assuage guilt without requiring genuine emotional investment. The assessment was harsh but accurate. She does care about you, Mom. She cares about what I represent to her future financial security. There's a difference. It was a difference I'd been reluctant to acknowledge, but the evidence was becoming harder to ignore. Thomas will have the surveillance team in place by tomorrow, Mom continued. And then we'll see who my grandchildren really are when they think no one important is watching. The thought of my children being watched and evaluated like laboratory subjects made me uncomfortable, but I couldn't argue with the necessity. They'd made their priorities clear, now it was time to discover if they could change, or if they'd already become exactly who they seemed to be. The next phase of Mom's plan was about to begin, and none of us were prepared for what it would reveal. Point 3. Weeks had passed since Thomas implemented the character protocol, and the changes in my children's behavior were as fascinating as they were disturbing. It was like watching actors who'd suddenly become aware they were being filmed, every gesture calculated, every word chosen for maximum effect. Marcus had visited 8 times, each encounter more performative than the last. He brought coffee from Mom's favorite cafe, downloaded audiobooks he thought she'd enjoy, and engaged in conversations about her childhood that he'd never shown interest in before. But there was something mechanical about his attention, like he was following a checklist rather than expressing genuine care. Sophia had appointed herself as Mom's unofficial medical advocate, arriving with carefully researched questions about treatment options and demanding detailed explanations from every nurse and doctor. She'd also begun bringing photo albums from family gatherings, pointing out moments she claimed demonstrated their special bond. The effort was remarkable. The authenticity was non-existent. David, meanwhile, had simply continued being himself, visiting when he could, usually bringing small gifts that cost almost nothing but showed real thought. Yesterday he'd brought a succulent plant because he remembered Mom mentioning that the hospital room felt sterile. The surveillance reports make for interesting reading, Thomas said, settling into his now familiar spot beside Mom's bed. She'd been moved to a private room after what the doctors diplomatically called complications, though she seemed stronger rather than weaker with each passing day. Share the highlights, Mom said, her eyes bright with curiosity. Thomas opened his folder. Marcus has made some fascinating calls to real estate agents. 3 different firms, asking about property assessments and market timing. He's particularly interested in estate sales and probate proceedings. While visiting me regularly and expressing deep concern for my well-being, Mom observed. Precisely. The cognitive dissonance is remarkable. Sophia has been even more creative. I looked up from my knitting, a nervous habit I'd rediscovered during the long hospital hours. Creative how? She's been researching assisted living facilities. High-end ones, specifically. She's told several colleagues that she's concerned about her grandmother's ability to live independently and thinks the family should consider transitional care options. The needle's stilled in my hands. She wants to put you in a nursing home? She wants to position herself as the responsible family member looking out for my best interests, Mom corrected. While conveniently making the house available for sale much sooner than my natural lifespan might allow. Thomas flipped to another page. But here's where it gets interesting. David has been having very different conversations. Such as? He's been researching in-home care options. Not facilities, services that would allow you to remain in your own house. He's also been looking into medical alert systems and home modification services for elderly accessibility. The contrast was stark and painful. While Marcus plotted real estate transactions and Sophia researched ways to warehouse Mom in institutional care, David was trying to figure out how to keep her comfortable and independent. There's more, Thomas continued. The investigative team has uncovered some additional family history that changes our understanding considerably. He pulled out a thick manila envelope. I've been your mother's attorney for 40 years, Rachel. But there are some things even I didn't know. Mom's expression shifted slightly. Thomas, we discussed, she needs to know, Margaret. Especially if we're going to continue with this plan. The tone of their exchange made my stomach clench. What kind of family history? Thomas looked at Mom, who nodded reluctantly. Your children's father didn't leave because of midlife crisis. Or another woman, as you've always believed. The words hit me like ice water. What do you mean? He left because your mother discovered he'd been systematically stealing from her investments. The room seemed to tilt sideways. That's impossible. Dad barely understood money management. Mom handled all the finances. Your mother handled the visible finances, Thomas corrected. But Robert had been forging her signature on documents, liquidating assets, and transferring money to accounts she knew nothing about. When she found out, she gave him a choice: return everything and leave quietly, or face criminal prosecution. I stared at Mom, searching her face for some sign that this was a mistake. You never told me. You were dealing with 3 young children and a nursing career. The last thing you needed was to know that your husband was a thief who'd been stealing from your mother to fund his gambling addiction. Gambling addiction? Thomas opened another file. Atlantic City, primarily. But also underground poker games and sports betting. He'd lost approximately $200,000 of your mother's money over 5 years. The number was staggering. 200,000? She got most of it back, Thomas continued. Robert had taken out loans using forged documents as collateral. When your mother threatened to expose the fraud, he liquidated his own assets to repay what he could. I felt like I was learning about strangers rather than my own family. How did you recover the rest? Robert's life insurance policy, Mom said quietly. When he died 8 years ago, I was still the beneficiary. The settlement covered what he couldn't repay while alive. The revelation was rewriting my entire understanding of my family history. My ex-husband hadn't been the victim of a midlife crisis, he'd been a criminal who chose exile over imprisonment. Why are you telling me this now? I asked Thomas, and Mom exchanged glances. Because your children's behavior is following a remarkably similar pattern, Thomas said carefully. What do you mean? Marcus has been accessing financial information he shouldn't have access to. Sophia has been asking detailed questions about your mother's accounts and investment strategies. They're displaying the same entitled attitude toward other people's money that their father demonstrated. The parallel was devastating. You think they inherited his tendencies? I think they learned his values, Mom said. Or lack thereof. The sense that other people's assets are just resources waiting to be claimed. I thought about Marcus's real estate research, Sophia's nursing home investigations, their casual discussions of inheritance while Mom lay dying. The similarities to Robert's behavior were undeniable. But David is different, I protested weakly. David is 23 and hasn't had time to develop the same level of entitlement, Thomas observed. But he's also demonstrating fundamentally different values. The question is whether that difference is temporary or permanent. Mom reached for my hand. Rachel, there's something else you need to know. Something that will change how we proceed with the character protocol. My stomach was already churning from the previous revelations. What? I'm not dying. The words hung in the air like an impossibility. What do you mean you're not dying? The cancer is real, she said quickly. But it's not terminal. Dr. Morrison wanted to discuss treatment options, but I asked him to delay that conversation until after I'd observed my grandchildren's reactions to my supposed impending death. I stared at her, feeling like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. You've been pretending to be dying? I've been allowing everyone to assume I was dying. The cancer is stage 2, not stage 4. Completely treatable with an excellent prognosis. You let me believe, my voice cracked. Mom, I've been grieving you for weeks. And I've been learning who my family really is when they think inheritance is imminent. The manipulation was breathtaking in its scope. You've been testing all of us. I've been protecting my legacy, she corrected. And discovering that my instincts about Marcus and Sophia were unfortunately accurate. Thomas cleared his throat. This changes the character protocol significantly. Instead of monitoring behavior during a deathbed vigil, we're now evaluating long-term character development. What does that mean? It means your mother will recover, return home, and continue observing her grandchildren's behavior for as long as necessary to make final inheritance decisions. The implications were staggering. They'll realize you're not dying. Eventually, Mom agreed. Which will create an interesting test of their true motivations. Will they be relieved that I'm surviving, or disappointed that their inheritance is delayed? I thought about Marcus's impatient text messages, Sophia's calculated visits, their obvious eagerness to convert grief into profit. How would they react to discovering their grandmother's death had been greatly exaggerated? There's one more complication, Thomas added, consulting his notes. The investigative team has uncovered something troubling about Marcus's recent activities. What kind of activities? He's been meeting with an estate planning attorney, not me, someone else. And he's been asking detailed questions about contesting wills, particularly in cases involving elderly relatives with potential cognitive decline. The room went cold. He's planning to challenge your will? He's researching his options, Thomas corrected. Which suggests he's not just expecting inheritance, he's planning to fight for it if necessary. Mom's jaw tightened. Just like his father. Sophia has been conducting similar research, Thomas continued. She's been consulting with colleagues about financial elder abuse cases and the legal procedures for assuming power of attorney. The betrayal was complete and devastating. While pretending to care about Mom's well-being, my children were actively plotting to control her assets. What about David? David has been researching something entirely different, Thomas said, his tone softening slightly. He's been looking into medical advocacy services and patients' rights organizations. Specifically, how to ensure elderly relatives receive appropriate care without having their autonomy compromised. The contrast was so stark it was almost unbelievable. 2 children planning to seize control of their grandmother's assets, and one trying to protect her independence. I want to confront them, I said, anger building in my chest. I want to force them to explain themselves. Not yet, Mom said firmly. Let's see how they respond to my miraculous recovery. Their reactions will tell us everything we need to know. When will you tell them? Tomorrow, she decided. Dr. Morrison will deliver the good news about my revised prognosis, and we'll observe their responses. Thomas made notes on his legal pad. The new will structures are already in place. Based on current behavior patterns, Marcus and Sophia's inheritances have decreased by approximately 60%. David's has increased proportionally. What if they contest the changes? Then they forfeit everything, Mom said simply. The automatic disinheritance clause is ironclad. I looked at my mother, truly looked at her, and saw not a dying woman, but a strategic mastermind who had orchestrated the most elaborate test of character I'd ever witnessed. She'd faked her own terminal diagnosis to expose her grandchildren's true natures. Are you proud of what you've discovered? I asked. Her expression was complex, part sadness, part vindication, part determination. I'm proud that I've learned the truth before it was too late to act on it. And I'm grateful that at least one of my grandchildren has demonstrated genuine character. Outside the hospital window, the autumn afternoon was fading into evening. Tomorrow would bring revelations that would permanently alter our family dynamics. My children would learn that their grandmother's death had been greatly exaggerated, and their inheritances would depend entirely on how they chose to respond. One more thing, Thomas said as he packed his briefcase. The surveillance will continue indefinitely. Every family interaction, every private conversation, every decision they make regarding your mother's welfare will be documented. For how long? Until she decides she's seen enough, he replied. Or until they prove they've genuinely changed. As Thomas left, I sat beside Mom's bed, struggling to process everything I'd learned. My ex-husband had been a thief. My children were following his example. My mother was staging the most elaborate psychological experiment in family history, and tomorrow, we would discover who my children really were when the prospect of easy inheritance disappeared. The test was about to enter its most crucial phase. Dr. Morrison entered the room at exactly 2 p.m., carrying a clipboard and wearing the kind of cautiously optimistic expression that suggested he was about to deliver news that would change everything. I had positioned myself near the window, ostensibly reading a magazine but actually watching my 3 children's faces as they arranged themselves around Mom's bed. Marcus sat in the chair closest to the head of the bed, the power position, I realized. Sophia had claimed the spot where she could see both Mom and the door, maintaining visual control of the situation. David had simply found a comfortable place near the foot of the bed, his attention focused entirely on his grandmother. Rather than strategic positioning. Mrs. Coleman, Dr. Morrison began, I have some very encouraging news about your test results. The room went still. I could feel the tension radiating from Marcus and Sophia like heat from a furnace. The pathology reports came back much more favorable than we initially expected. The cancer is stage 2, not stage 4 as we first suspected. With treatment, your prognosis is excellent, we're looking at a full recovery. The silence that followed was profound and telling. David's face transformed immediately, relief, joy, and something approaching euphoria flooding his features. That's incredible. Grandma, you're going to be okay. Marcus and Sophia, by contrast, looked like they'd been physically struck. The color drained from Sophia's face as she processed the implications. Marcus's expression cycled rapidly through confusion, disbelief, and something that looked disturbingly like disappointment. But, Sophia began, then caught herself. I mean, that's wonderful news. Are you certain about the diagnosis? Very certain, Dr. Morrison confirmed. We'll need to begin treatment immediately, but Mrs. Coleman should be able to return home within the week. Home? Marcus's voice cracked slightly. She's going home? With proper support, absolutely. The treatment is outpatient, and her overall health is remarkably good for someone her age. I watched my older children struggle to rearrange their faces into appropriate expressions of relief and joy. The effort was painful to observe, like watching actors who'd forgotten their lines trying to improvise their way through a scene. What kind of treatment? David asked, already pulling out his phone. I want to research everything, make sure we're prepared to help however we can. Chemotherapy and radiation, but a relatively mild protocol. The key will be ensuring she has adequate support at home during recovery. Of course, Marcus said quickly, recovering some of his composure. We'll make sure she has everything she needs. But there was something hollow in his voice, a flatness that suggested he was recalculating rather than celebrating. Dr. Morrison continued explaining treatment timelines and care requirements while I studied my children's reactions. David was taking notes, asking detailed questions about side effects and recovery expectations. Marcus was nodding along but seemed distracted, his gaze frequently drifting to his phone. Sophia appeared to be conducting rapid mental arithmetic. Her fingers tapping silently against her purse in a pattern I recognized from her childhood, her nervous calculation gesture. I'll leave you to celebrate this good news, Dr. Morrison said finally. Nurse Williams will be by later to discuss the discharge planning. As the doctor left, an awkward silence settled over the room. The dynamic had shifted completely, and everyone seemed to be recalibrating their expectations and behavior. This is amazing, Grandma, David said, reaching for her hand. I was so scared we were going to lose you. You're not getting rid of me that easily, Mom replied, her eyes twinkling with what I now recognized as satisfaction. She was enjoying this. So you'll be living at home? Sophia asked, her tone carefully neutral. During treatment? That's the plan. Unless you think I need institutional care? Mom's question was pointed, and I saw Sophia flush slightly. No, of course not. I just want to make sure you'll be safe and comfortable. I've been living independently for 40 years, Mom said mildly. I think I can manage a few more. Marcus cleared his throat. Actually, Grandma, maybe this is a good time to discuss some practical considerations. Your house is pretty large for one person, and if you're going to be dealing with treatment fatigue, here it came. Even faced with his grandmother's recovery and reprieve from death, Marcus couldn't resist pushing toward his ultimate goal. What kind of practical considerations? Mom asked innocently. Well, downsizing might make sense. Something smaller, more manageable. Maybe a nice condo or assisted living community with medical support available. You want me to sell my house? I want you to consider all your options, Marcus said carefully. The market is really strong right now, and you could probably get an excellent price. Then you'd have liquid assets for medical expenses, and you wouldn't have to worry about maintenance and upkeep during recovery. I watched Mom's face remain perfectly neutral as Marcus essentially pitched her on liquidating her life's anchor for his financial benefit. That's an interesting perspective, she said. Sophia, as a financial advisor, what's your professional opinion? Sophia straightened, clearly hoping to redeem herself. Well, Grandma, Marcus makes some valid points. From a purely financial standpoint, maintaining a large property does represent ongoing costs and responsibilities. Converting real estate to liquid investments could provide more flexibility and security. Especially at your age, Marcus added, apparently unable to resist reinforcing the point. David looked between his siblings with growing disgust. Are you seriously suggesting she sell her home while she's still recovering from a cancer diagnosis? We're being practical, Sophia snapped. Something you've never been very good at. Practical? David's voice rose. She just found out she's going to live, and you're already trying to convince her to sell everything and move into a nursing home. Assisted living isn't a nursing home, Marcus corrected. It's a lifestyle choice that provides security and convenience. For who? David demanded. Because it sounds like it's pretty convenient for you to have her house on the market. The room erupted into the kind of family argument that had been building for weeks. Marcus and Sophia immediately went on the defensive, their voices overlapping. As they insisted their suggestions were motivated by genuine concern. David refused to back down, his accusations becoming more pointed with each exchange. You've been planning this for months, he said, his face flushed with anger. Both of you. I've heard you talking about property values and inheritance timelines. Like she was already dead. That's not true, Sophia protested, but her voice lacked conviction. Really? Because I've seen the text messages, Sophia. Marcus showed them to me. My heart stopped. In all the planning and plotting, I'd forgotten that siblings talk to each other, that secrets have a way of spreading even within families. What text messages? Mom asked quietly, but her voice cut through the argument like a blade. David pulled out his phone with the air of someone who'd been waiting for this moment. The ones where they discuss when you're going to die so they can inherit the house. He began reading aloud, his voice shaking with emotion. Mom's finally dying. When do we get the house? Finally. The property value has gone up 40%. We should list it immediately. I already called a realtor. Market's hot right now. Could get $850K easy. Each quote landed like a physical blow. I watched Marcus and Sophia's faces crumble as their own words were read back to them. There was no way to spin those messages, no innocent explanation that could make them sound like anything other than what they were. There's more, David continued, his voice gaining strength. Split 3 ways, that's almost $300K each. About time we get something out of this situation. The silence that followed was devastating. Mom's face had gone very still, her expression unreadable. I found myself holding my breath, waiting for her response. I see, she said finally. And when exactly were these messages sent? 3 weeks ago, David said quietly. While you were unconscious from the morphine. They were discussing your death like a business transaction while you were lying right there. Marcus tried to salvage the situation. Grandma, those messages were taken out of context. We were just trying to be prepared for difficult decisions. What context? Mom interrupted, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. What context makes discussing my death as a financial opportunity appropriate? We didn't mean it like that, Sophia said desperately. We were emotional, not thinking clearly. Oh, you were thinking very clearly, Mom corrected. You were thinking about money. About what my death would mean for your bank accounts. About how quickly you could convert my life into liquid assets. The accusation hung in the air like a sword. Marcus and Sophia looked like they wanted to disappear into the floor. David, Mom continued, you said Marcus showed you these messages. When? Yesterday, David replied. He was bragging about how much money we were all going to inherit. He seemed to think I'd be excited about it. And were you? David's expression hardened. I told him he was a heartless bastard and that I didn't want any part of their blood money. The phrase blood money seemed to hit Marcus like a physical blow. It's not blood money. It's inheritance. It's normal family financial planning. Normal. David's voice cracked with emotion. Normal is grieving. When someone you love is dying. Normal is focusing on their comfort and your memories together. Normal is not calculating real estate commissions while they're unconscious in a hospital bed. Enough, Mom said quietly, but the word carried absolute authority. The argument ceased. Immediately, she looked at each of her grandchildren in turn, her gaze lingering longest on Marcus and Sophia. When she spoke again, her voice was calm but implacable. I have learned something very important about my family over the past few weeks. Something that will influence every decision I make going forward. Grandma, Sophia began, but Mom raised her hand for silence. I have learned that 2 of my grandchildren see me primarily as a financial resource. That they have been eagerly anticipating my death because it represents profit. That they view my home, the place where I raised my daughter, where you spent countless holidays and summers, as nothing more than a real estate transaction. Marcus and Sophia both started to protest, but Mom continued inexorably. I have also learned that one of my grandchildren values relationships over money, family over profit, and human dignity over financial gain. She turned to David, her expression softening. Thank you for showing me who you really are. Grandma, Marcus said desperately, please let us explain. What is there to explain? Mom asked. Your words were quite clear. Your priorities were quite obvious. Your character has been quite thoroughly demonstrated. I realized this was the moment we had been building toward, not just the revelation of the children's greed, but the reckoning that would follow. Mom was about to pass judgment, and everyone in the room knew it. I am not dying, she continued, which means I have time to make some important decisions about my legacy. About what kind of family story I want to leave behind. What kind of decisions? Sophia asked, though her voice suggested she was afraid to hear the answer. Mom smiled, but it wasn't a warm expression. The kind that ensure my assets go to people who value relationships more than real estate. Who understand that family is about love, not liquidation. The implications were crystal clear. Marcus and Sophia were about to learn that inheritance isn't automatic, it's earned, and they had failed the test spectacularly. The following morning brought an unexpected visitor to Mom's hospital room. Thomas Whitmore arrived not with his usual briefcase of legal documents, but with a manila envelope that seemed to carry the weight of our family's future. Good morning, Margaret, he said, settling into his familiar chair. Rachel. I trust everyone had time to process yesterday's revelations. Mom was sitting up in bed, looking more alert and energetic than she had in weeks. The prospect of recovery, and the satisfaction of exposing her grandchildren's true natures, seemed to have given her renewed vitality. I've had all night to think, she replied. And I've made some decisions. Marcus and Sophia had both called repeatedly since yesterday's confrontation, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails that ranged from tearful apologies to angry accusations. David had stayed at the hospital until visiting hours ended, helping Mom with dinner and quietly apologizing for his siblings' behavior. Before we discuss the future, Thomas said, there are some things you all need to understand about the past. He opened the envelope and pulled out a thick folder. The surveillance reports from the past month make for fascinating reading. I felt my stomach clench. What kind of surveillance reports? Marcus has been in contact with 3 different real estate agents, Thomas began matter-of-factly. He's had your mother's house appraised twice and has been asking about estate sale procedures. He's also consulted with a probate attorney about challenging wills on grounds of diminished capacity. The words hit like physical blows. My son had been planning not just to inherit Mom's house, but to fight for it legally if necessary. Sophia has been equally busy, Thomas continued. She's researched power of attorney procedures, guardianship laws, and something called financial elder abuse prevention, ironically. Information she was planning to use to gain control of your mother's assets. I stared at the folder in Thomas's hands. How do you know all this? Barrett and Associates has been very thorough, Mom said quietly. Phone calls, internet searches, conversations with colleagues. I wanted to know exactly who my grandchildren had become. Thomas turned to a new page. But the most disturbing discovery came yesterday, after your family meeting. What do you mean? Marcus called Sophia at 11:47 p.m. The conversation lasted 37 minutes. Thomas pulled out a transcript. Would you like me to read the highlights? I wasn't sure I could handle any more revelations, but I nodded weakly. Marcus said, and I quote, "This recovery thing changes everything. We need to find another way to get her out of that house." Sophia responded, what if we convince Mom that Grandma can't live alone safely? Get her declared incompetent. The betrayal was complete and devastating. Even after being exposed, even after seeing the pain their words had caused, my children were still plotting to strip their grandmother of her independence and assets. There's more, Thomas continued relentlessly. Marcus suggested hiring a geriatric assessment service to find reasons why your mother shouldn't live alone. Sophia offered to research Medicare fraud allegations that could force asset seizure. I felt like I was drowning in my children's cruelty. They were planning to frame her. They were planning whatever it took to get control of her assets, Thomas corrected. The conversation lasted until well past midnight, and they scheduled a Meeting for this afternoon to finalize their strategy. Mom reached over and took my hand. I'm sorry you have to hear this, Rachel. But you needed to know who they really are. David? I asked weakly. What about David? Thomas's expression softened slightly. David has been researching caregiver services, medical transportation options, and home modification grants for elderly independents. He's also started a GoFundMe page to help with your mother's medical expenses. The contrast was so stark it was almost unbelievable. While Marcus and Sophia plotted to strip Mom of her autonomy, David was trying to ensure her independence and dignity. I've made my decision, Mom announced, her voice carrying the finality of a judge delivering a verdict. Thomas, please proceed with the new will. Thomas pulled out a bound document. The Margaret Coleman estate plan, revised and finalized this morning. He opened to the first page and began reading aloud. I, Margaret Rose Coleman, being of sound mind and body, do hereby revoke all previous wills and testaments. As he continued, the distribution of Mom's estate became clear. David would inherit the house, the majority of her investment portfolio, and the rental properties. Various charities would receive substantial donations. Marcus and Sophia would each receive exactly $1, the legal minimum required to prevent them from claiming they were accidentally omitted. $1? I whispered. Plus a letter, Mom said grimly, explaining exactly why their inheritance reflects their demonstrated character. Thomas pulled out 2 sealed envelopes. These letters detail their behavior over the past month, including direct quotes from their conversations about your mother's death being a financial opportunity. The finality of it was stunning. In one document, Mom had effectively ended her relationship with 2 of her grandchildren. There's one more provision, Thomas continued. If either Marcus or Sophia contests this will, David's inheritance increases by the amount they would have received under the previous will. So if they fight it, they get nothing and David gets everything? Precisely. It's designed to discourage legal challenges while rewarding the family member who showed genuine character. A soft knock at the door interrupted our discussion. David peered around the frame, carrying a small potted orchid and wearing a concerned expression. Am I interrupting something important? He asked. Come in, sweetheart, Mom said, her entire demeanor changing as she saw him. We were just discussing family business. David approached the bed cautiously, clearly sensing the gravity of the conversation. Is everything okay? Everything is exactly as it should be, Mom replied. David, I want you to know how proud I am of you. Of the man you've become, the values you've demonstrated, the genuine care you've shown. He blushed slightly. I just want you to be okay, Grandma. That's all that matters. That, Mom said, looking pointedly at the space where Marcus and Sophia weren't standing, is exactly what I mean. Thomas cleared his throat. David, there are some things you need to know about your inheritance. Over the next few minutes, Thomas explained the new will's provisions. I watched David's face cycle through shock, disbelief, and something approaching horror. You're giving me everything? He asked when Thomas finished. I'm giving you what you've earned through your character and behavior, Mom corrected. Your siblings chose to demonstrate different values. But, the house? All of it? I don't need all that money, Grandma. The response was so perfectly David, more concerned about the responsibility than excited about the wealth. It only reinforced Mom's decision. What you do with your inheritance is up to you, Mom said. But I trust you to use it wisely, to help others, to honor the values that earned it. David was quiet for a long moment, processing the magnitude of what he'd just learned. What about Marcus and Sophia? They're still family. They're still your siblings, Mom agreed. But they've shown me exactly what they value, and it isn't family relationships. Maybe they'll change, David said hopefully. Maybe this will be a wake-up call. Thomas and Mom exchanged glances. David, Thomas said gently, they were recorded planning additional schemes to gain control of your grandmother's assets as recently as last night. David's face fell. Even after yesterday? Even after yesterday, Mom confirmed. Some people can't be redeemed, sweetheart. They can only be prevented from causing further damage. As if summoned by our conversation, both Marcus and Sophia appeared in the doorway. They looked haggard, desperate, and slightly out of breath, as if they'd been running through the hospital corridors. "Grandma," Marcus began, "we need to talk. About yesterday, about everything." "We want to explain." "There's nothing to explain," Mom said calmly. "I heard your explanation last night." Sophia stepped forward. "What do you mean?" Thomas held up the transcript of their phone conversation. "We mean the 37-minute discussion about having your grandmother declared incompetent and investigating Medicare fraud allegations." The color drained from both their faces. Marcus's mouth opened and closed silently, while Sophia gripped the doorframe as if she might collapse. "You were listening to our private conversations?" Sophia whispered. "I was protecting myself from my own grandchildren," Mom corrected. "Something I never thought I'd need to do." "You can't hold a private conversation against us," Marcus protested weakly. "We were upset, not thinking clearly." "You were planning fraud," Thomas interrupted. "Multiple felonies, actually. Conspiracy to commit elder abuse, attempted financial exploitation, and fraud related to government benefits." The legal terminology seemed to hit them like physical blows. Marcus sank into a chair while Sophia leaned against the wall for support. "We never would have actually done any of that," Sophia said desperately. "We were just venting. Working through our feelings." "Your feelings about how to steal from your grandmother?" David asked, his voice thick with disgust. "We weren't trying to steal anything," Marcus snapped. "It's going to be our inheritance anyway." "Actually," Thomas said pleasantly, "it isn't." He handed them each a copy of the new will. I watched their faces as they read, seeing the exact moment when they realized they'd been disinherited. Marcus went pale, then red, then pale again. Sophia began shaking her head as if she could deny the words on the page. "This isn't legal," Marcus said finally. "You can't disinherit family members for having private conversations." "I can disinherit family members for demonstrated character defects," Mom replied. "Which you've both provided in abundance." "We'll contest this," Sophia threatened, though her voice lacked conviction. "Please do," Mom said with satisfaction. "Read Section 12 carefully. Any legal challenge forfeits your remaining inheritance and transfers it to David." They flipped to Section 12, and I watched their last hope die in their eyes. $1? Marcus's voice cracked. "You're leaving us each $1? Plus a letter explaining why," Mom said. "Would you like me to read it aloud?" They both shook their heads frantically. "Then I suggest you take some time to reflect on the choices that led to this moment," Mom continued. "And perhaps consider whether your relationship with money is more important than your relationship with family." Marcus stood up slowly, his movements mechanical. "This isn't over." "Yes," Mom said quietly, "it is." They left without another word, their footsteps echoing down the hospital corridor like a funeral march for our family relationships. David was quiet for several minutes after they left, staring at the will in his hands. Finally, he looked up at Mom with tears in his eyes. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm sorry they turned out this way. I'm sorry you had to make this choice." "I'm not sorry," Mom replied firmly. "I'm grateful. Grateful that I learned the truth before it was too late to act on it. Grateful that at least one of my grandchildren grew up to be the kind of person I hoped you'd all become." She reached for his hand. "And I'm grateful that my legacy will be in the hands of someone who understands that wealth is a responsibility, not just an opportunity." 2 weeks later, Mom was discharged from the hospital and returned to her beloved house. David moved into the guest bedroom temporarily, helping with her recovery and learning about the extensive business interests he would someday inherit. Marcus and Sophia both tried reaching out several times, through lawyers, mutual friends, and eventually desperate phone calls. But Mom's position never wavered. They had shown their true character, and consequences were consequences. 3 months after the confrontation, I received a call from David. He was at Mom's house, helping her reorganize her study, when they discovered something remarkable: a detailed journal she'd been keeping for over 2 years, documenting every interaction with her grandchildren, every conversation, every gesture of care or disregard. "She's been planning this for a long time, Mom," David said. "Not just the will changes, the whole test. She wrote that she wanted to know who we really were before she decided our futures." The journal revealed that Mom had been watching and evaluating long before the cancer diagnosis, long before the surveillance team, long before the elaborate deception about her prognosis. She'd been a student of her own family, carefully documenting the gradual revelation of her grandchildren's true natures. "What does that make you feel?" I asked David. "Grateful," he said without hesitation. "Grateful that she cared enough to pay attention. Grateful that she valued character over comfort. Grateful that she taught me what real family responsibility looks like." 6 months later, Marcus and Sophia had both moved away, Marcus to another state where his real estate license might help him start over, Sophia to a new financial firm that hadn't heard about her family troubles. They maintained no contact with Mom, and she seemed perfectly content with their absence. David, meanwhile, had used his early inheritance to expand his nonprofit work, creating a foundation that helped elderly people maintain their independence and dignity. He'd kept Mom's house exactly as it was, understanding that some things were worth preserving exactly as they'd always been. One evening, as I sat with Mom on her back porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, she turned to me with a satisfied smile. "Do you think I was too hard on them?" she asked.